I wonder. That's what I wanted to talk about today. Is the landscape at 135. I wanted to uh, go over these four guys. I'm not going to talk about Lomachenko because no one really mentioned his name. But I just I wanted to use today. I want to talk a bit about how I see the landscape between these four guys, them being Haney, Lopez, Garcia, and Tank, and how I see these two fights that have been spoken about mostly in the last week. How do I see those fights going? How I would see them going. And I'm gonna start with sharing what I think each one of these guys brings to the table on both the good, on the positive, and the negative side. Before I actually go into the potential matchups, I want to start with Lopez. I think Lopez is right now is to be considered obviously of the four number one because he beat Lomachenko. He's had the toughest test to date, and now he holds obviously 3 belts out of 4 according to some people and 4 belts out of 4 according to the rest of the people. I think Lopez is in his development. I think he's all around the most well-rounded guy. I think Lopez is physically probably the strongest guy out of the 4. I'm not saying that he hits the hardest. I just think he's physically he's the biggest, naturally the biggest guy. He's the guy that's gonna. He's probably the first one to move up in weight. Physically, just solid. I think his skills. I think he possesses, all in all, he has very good boxing skills. When he wants to box, we saw it against Lomachenko. He was able to, in the first 6 rounds, he was able to keep his cool. He was able to maintain long distance, using his jab, going down to the body without really overcommitting at any point. And that's something that I think is very rare in a guy this young. And it's what won him the fight ultimately, because if he would have pressed the gas a bit more early, he might have not made it out that 11th round, right? That where Lomachenko really started to pour it on, and he was then able to come back in the 12th, in which he showed something else that the other guys haven't had to really show yet, other than Garcia, which is the mental fortitude to be in the last round of a championship fight. And have momentum clearly not on your side. I mean, he had won the first half of the fight, but then rounds 7, 8, 9, 10, Lomachenko was coming strong, especially then in the 11th, and he bit down on his gum shield and walked forward and pressed the action, won that last round. So I think he's been already presented with certain obstacles and problems in his career that the other 3 haven't faced. I think the issue with Lopez, in my opinion, though, is that although he has good boxing skills, he has very good. What really is his main attribute is, in my opinion, still his explosiveness, his ability to cut distance fast, right? We saw it against Comey. We didn't see it much against Lomachenko. We saw it against Nakatani when he was getting in a groove. He was just able to counter fast with the right hand. And after countering with the right hand, he would always come back with a left hook, right? So he's able to cut that distance really quick. The moment he starts, right, standing in his orthodox position, right, as he slips, he's already cutting distance. You don't even notice it because you just see his head move to the side, but he's already covering distance with his feet. So when he's throwing the right hand, he's already in position to throw a left hook, right? Which is something that he does extremely well. On the flip side, what I think his biggest issue is that he, when you compare it to these other three guys, right? I think he doesn't quite have the same hand speed as everyone else. He's a bit slower, and he needs to be in a rhythm. He needs to feel comfortable to let his offense go fluidly. When he's uncomfortable, when he doesn't have that mental calmness, he has trouble finding his range. He has trouble, jabbing. You can see his discomfort, and then he'll eventually start throwing these loopy right hands, or holding, or you can sense the distress, right? You could see it against Lomachenko between rounds 7, especially between rounds 8, 9, 10, and 11, where when Lomachenko really started to press the action coming forward, Lopez didn't really have an answer. He technically didn't. The mechanisms weren't there to slip and throw. He tried it with the uppercut, but he never adjusted. It kept missing, and so I think that's an issue, because when you're fighting guys that are fast, that are also creative, like Haney, especially Haney and Tank, guys that are always feinting, that are always moving their feet, even subtle little movements. Haney more in terms of boxing and moving, and Tank more with foot feints and little side steps. I think Lopez, he needs to have more. He needs to create mechanics that are more second nature, triggers where he just automatically lets his hands go, right? Guy comes in, especially Tank, who's a shorter guy, who would come in with these looping lefts, right? Just the moment that hand comes, uppercut or hook or what. I'm just naming a specific shot for an example to make a point. It's more of a thing of, like I said, creating these triggers so that you're not always relying on being comfortable and getting in a rhythm, right? Speaking of who does have that rhythm, who for me is the most talented, naturally talented fighter of the four, is Haney. Haney doesn't, although he hasn't been tested like Lopez has, and he hasn't been dropped like Garcia has. He hasn't been in these hard fights, and he also hasn't had all these world title fights that Tank has had. I think Haney is just, you can see the talent to just box that the other guys don't quite have to that extent, right? When everyone was talking about the Gamboa fight and how Haney didn't look good against Gamboa, and that's not true. The thing is that Haney doesn't have that kind of elite power that Garcia has, or that Tank, or that Lopez had. I have no doubt that an in-shape Tank would have gotten rid of Gamboa in much less than 12 rounds. And I'm also certain that Lopez would have gotten rid of Gamboa, and Garcia too. He's tailor-made for these guys, right? Haney just doesn't have that kind of pop. He doesn't have that kind of just concussive knockout power, and he's also, of the four, the most defensive minded, right? So he was never gonna, you couldn't, I mean, of course he said that he was gonna knock out Gamboa and he wanted to do it quicker than Crawford did, but fighters say you're gonna knock someone out all the time. That's just the way we're wired. But what really does have to be taken away from that, if you really look at that fight, and if you really look at most most Devin Haney fights, the recent ones, don't go back too far because it makes no sense. That's why I also just mentioned Nakatani and Lomachenko with Lopez. Is no matter where Haney goes, he always knows what to throw. It just comes automatic. He gets held, he throws an uppercut. He steps to the left, he throws a left hand. He steps to the right, he throws a right hand. He pulls back, he throws something. He slips in, he throws. It just automatically, it's just ingrained into his brain that every movement comes with a punch when you're in the pocket, right? They might not be hard shots, but it's about being able to, out of each position that you fight, any position you might find yourself in a fight, there's always something you can throw, and it's second nature to him. He just throws. Doesn't matter if he's, whatever he's in position to throw, he lets his hand go. And that's something that's very hard to do. That's something that takes years and years to get to a point where, again, it's just second nature. And same thing with his jab. He has a phenomenal jab. He has great foot movement. So I think he just lacks the power that the other guys have. I think that the hardest hitter of the four is obviously Tank. I think Tank has massive left hand. He carries phenomenal power in his right hand too. The one thing he also brings that neither one of the other guys brings is he has a mental intensity to him, right? That makes it dangerous. And this is why I thought, or I think it might be a little bit too soon for Garcia. And that's, Tank is a very he mentally drains his opponents because everything about him is just intense. His attitude outside of the ring, then inside of the ring is that intensity. Then he carries that. He has blinding hand speed as well. Ferocious punching power, right? But that is also then mixed with that I don't give a fuck attitude of putting his hands up and just walking guys down and just creating huge leverage with shots. So that's where that's a big edge that Tank has over, especially maybe guys like maybe Garcia and Haney who might not be quite as mentally as as developed. They might not have that. They might haven't gotten to that point yet. That I don't care point that Lopez had that. Like again, you see it in the 12th round of their fight. He just bites down on his gumshoe and starts trading. And I think someone like Tank will always be very good at making guys feel out of their depth and just pouncing. And the moment he sees that, he just pounces on you and just doesn't let go until it's over, right? But then that can also be detrimental. That is, in my opinion, Davis' biggest drawback is he gets hit too much because he doesn't care. And he just then he just gets in this mindset where he just wants to knock you out and just walk straight into shots. And he has never fought a guy that has the power that maybe Garcia has, or that has the power that Lopez has, where walking into shots like that is ludicrous. But what's also negative about that constant intensity is if it's not working for him, right? It's that bully mentality that he has that works well in the first few rounds, but if your guy doesn't have, if that guy still doesn't respect you, if a guy doesn't really care too much about that power of yours, then what happens next? Where do you go next? And we've seen this throughout the history a lot of times with huge power punches, with bullies, right? Mike Tyson, every time he stepped up, every time a guy truly wasn't scared, and a guy was still there after getting hit, Mike Tyson ended up getting knocked out. You know, Holyfield, Lennox Lewis are the first two examples that come to mind. And now more recently, not in boxing, but actually in boxing with Conor McGregor, the same thing. When he fought Nate Diaz, you saw it. He's just, you know, when the guy is still standing, you hit him and the guy is still standing, that's just nervous energy that starts to build up, right? You get nervous, you get anxious. You start breathing heavier, your energy just depletes much quicker. You start to lose your legs, your reflexes slow down, and that's just the beginning of the end, right? And that's very common amongst fighters that have this bully mentality, which I think is Tank's biggest drawback. Also the fact that he's not really a 135 pounder. I mean, even against Garcia, against Leo Santa Cruz, he came in at 130. It was for belts at 130, 135, but he's not at 135 yet. He's the smallest guy out of all of them. And I don't think that he physically can't compete. Quite the opposite. I think he's physically behind Lopez probably the strongest of the four. I think he's the hardest puncher of the four, without a doubt in my mind. But stylistically, I think that can be a problem for him, and I'm going to get back to that later. Lastly, we have Garcia. And Garcia is technically, I think, the one that has the furthest to go in terms of just all-in-all technical abilities. I think he makes a lot of mistakes still, but he makes up for it. What he has height, power, speed, and timing. With the last one being the most important, I think, because again, we hear this all the time in boxing, right? Stars make fights. So a guy like Tank, who has all the power in the world, who has fast hands, who could knock anyone out when he lands, he still has to cut a lot of distance. There's a 5-inch height advantage, and reach advantage must be around there as well, 5-6 inches. So there's a big space and time in which Garcia can land on a guy like Tank, in which Tank could not land on Garcia, not because he's not quick enough, but just because he has to start from further out. He has to cover more space to get in. And Garcia does have very good timing. I spoke about it last week. Spoke about it leading up to the Campbell fight. He has great timing with that, especially with that left hook. So yeah, even though he stands up too straight and makes mistakes, he was just in a fight that exposed a lot of these mistakes. You know, and he has a great team behind him that will sit down and will for sure tell him where he made certain mistakes.